Today we are going to talk about how to convert fractions and decimals into percents and vice versa. You have done this many times in the past, so that is why I'm combining sections 7.1 and 7.2. If you'd like more practice, feel free to refer back to your book to read through each section independently and do some practice problems. But I'm just going to give you a general overview today and take a look at some more intricate problems. So let's see, to go from a percent to a fraction. Let's take a look at that first. Basically, remember that percent means per 100. So basically, we're expressing the percentage as a ratio out of 100. Always simplify whenever possible. Also, just so you know, it's okay to have percents that are less than 1% and that are greater than 100%. Think about medications. A lot of times if you look at labels on a medication, they might have a very, very small percentage of a certain type of drug versus another, and those might be under 1%. Also think of a photocopier, or if you're in Photoshop and you want to enlarge something, you are growing that object, that picture, by more than 100%. So don't be worried if you see fractional or decimal percents. That is totally normal and okay. Let's take a look at some examples. We'll keep it simple. 48%. Again, this means 48 out of 100. These are equal. I'm representing them in two different formats, but 48% and 48/100ths is the same thing. We can go ahead and simplify, and this simplifies down to 12/25ths after we divide both the numerator and denominator by 4. Okay, so let's take a look at something a little bit more interesting. Let's look at 130%. We can do the same thing with 130% that we just did with 48%. It's still 130 out of 100. Of course, this is going to be larger than the original, 130 out of 100. So when we simplify that, I can start by dividing by 10. I can get 13/10ths, and then I do want you to change your improper fractions into mixed numbers, so we will get 1 3/10. Again, please note the equal signs. These are all equal. I can say 130% or I can say 1 3/10. They mean the same thing. Let's look at a decimal percent that is smaller than 1%. So let's say we have 0.9%. Again, we can change this into a fraction of 0.9 over 100. Notice that I'm never changing the original number I'm starting with. I'm just putting it over 100. This is not simplified. To simplify a fraction, you do not want to have any decimals. So how do you move decimals? You multiply by multiples of 10. If I go ahead and multiply by 10 in this case, that moves that decimal point over once. And remember, whatever you do to the numerator, you also have to do to the denominator. We need to keep everything proportional. So we move that over, we get 9/1000ths, and this is as low as we can go. There are no more common factors here. Okay, so now here's a favorite example of mine. This is more of the 7th grade pre-algebra level, because I know you've seen these other examples before. Let's say we want to change 83 1/3% into a fraction. Now you might say, well, it's already a fraction. That's not quite true. Right now this is written as a percent because of the percent sign. It happens to have a fractional element, but this is not a single fraction. So we look at this as a percentage. Now you might go, well, I'll just change it into a decimal first. Here's where the problem arises. What is 1/3 as a decimal? Well, 1 divided by 3 gives you 0.3 repeating. So I could write this as 83.3 repeating percent. But that doesn't really get me any closer to my goal. Do not round. Please do not round. Don't just say 83.3% and then go from there, because your answer will not be exact. It will be a rounded answer, and we are able to get an exact answer in this situation. So what do? Well, we're going to do the same thing we did before. We're going to put the number we're given, 83 1/3, over 100. And then we're going to use what we know about mixed numbers and dividing by fractions to simplify. And actually the process works out really well. Don't try using a calculator. Calculators make this much more difficult. Let's just use our brains. So what does this look like? Well, 83 1/3 over 100. That's what it looks like. A little bit funky. So let's rewrite it. I'm basically taking 83 1/3 and I'm dividing it by 100. Okay, so I'm writing it horizontally, and I'm changing my larger fraction bar into the division sign. Well, I know how to divide mixed numbers and whole numbers. We can easily do this. First, let's change 83 1/3 into a mixed number. So you will need to do 83 times 3 plus 1. So go ahead and do that calculation. Think in your head, 80 times 3, and then 3 times 3, and then add them together. Okay, you're thinking? You should get 249, and then plus 1 gives us 250. We need to keep it over the original denominator of 3. Okay, and I'm dividing it by 100 over 1. I'm just going to put that denominator in so I can see that more clearly. So what do I do now? Well, remember, to divide fractions, we actually have to rewrite it as multiplication of the multiplicative inverse. This is all stuff we've done before. We're just applying it here. So I'm going to change it to multiplication of 1/100th. This is not so bad because you multiply across. I could cross cancel now, but let me just show you what you get when you multiply across. You get 250 over 300. And this is a fraction that we can definitely simplify. This is not a problem to work with whatsoever. You can divide first by 10, okay, and you get 25/30ths. Now you can divide by 5, and you get 5/6. And this is an exact answer. So it turns out that 83 1/3% is equal to 5/6. These mean the same thing. Okay? You would not have gotten 5/6, however, if you had rounded 0.3 repeating to just 0.3. So again, do not round. We can manipulate and work with these numbers without too much brain power, and I just want you to know that you can do that. Let's go ahead and take a look at some other examples before I have you work on your own. So let's change fractions to percentages. There are a few different ways we can do this. You can write an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100, kind of set up a proportion and solve, or you can change your fraction into a decimal and then multiply by 100 and get your percentage that way. Please note that whenever you're changing something into a percent, you do need to have the percent sign. Also, before we were going from percents into fractions, so therefore our final answer did not have a percent sign. You really need to make sure that you're labeling everything appropriately. So let's just start with a basic example. Let's say we want to change 3/5 into a percent. So the first way I said we could do that was to set up a proportion and figure this out. I know it has to equal some part over 100. We can cross multiply, but I'm sure you've seen here that 5 goes into 100 really nicely. We can multiply by 20. So I can multiply by 20 in the numerator as well to get a numerator of 60. So this equals 60 100ths. Now we're not done. We have to take this and convert it into a percentage. So since it's already out of 100, I can take what's in the numerator and write that as my percent. So I can say 60 100ths is equal to 60%. So 3/5 equals 60%. Let's take a look at 3/2. This is an improper fraction. That's fine. I know that this percent will end up being over 100 because it's improper. 3/2 is 1.5. So again, lots of different ways we could look at it. If you want to go ahead and set up a proportion and try to figure out, okay, well, what would this be equal to out of 100? You can do that. It does, again, work out pretty nicely. I'd need to multiply by 50 here. 3 times 50 does give us 150. So we will, in fact, get 150 over 100, and that would lead us to 150%. Now, let's say it doesn't work out so nicely. What do you do then? Well, for example, 3/7. Here again, we could go ahead and do the same thing. You can set up a proportion. 7 does not go evenly into 100, so you could cross multiply, or in other words, use the cross product. Okay, this is one way to do it. And you'd get 3 times 100, which is 300, and that should equal 7 times x. And then we can go ahead and divide by 7. You may use a calculator for this calculation just to save us some time right now. When you do that calculation, you get x equals 42.85714 ... I'm going to tell you to round to the nearest tenth. Now, whenever you see that as a direction and you're working with percentages, always round to the nearest tenth of a percent. You want your answer to be as accurate as possible. Now, in this case, again, I'm working with my ratio, so this number x would be 42 point, if I round it to the nearest tenth, it would be 9 over 100. And that again gives me my percent of 42.9%. Okay. Now, this is not the only way to do any of these. Like I said before, you could also change them into decimals and then multiply by 100. So let's just take another look at this example, because either way works, but I don't want you to mix them up. You need to know, when am I moving the decimal, when am I not moving the decimal. When you're working with proportions and ratios with denominators of 100, you're not moving any decimal points, but you do so when going straight to a decimal first. So if you changed 3/7 into a decimal, and again for time purposes you may use a calculator, 3 divided by 7, you get the decimal 0.428514 dot 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 dot. Looks very similar to the number we got before, except the decimal of course is not in the same place. Here's where that direction comes in. Don't round to 0.4 and tell me that this is 40%. You'll be missing out on more of the accuracy if you do that too soon. When you take your decimal, the next step would be to multiply by 100. We do move that decimal twice. We will get 42.857 dot 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 dot, and now we can round to the nearest tenth of a percent. So we can change that to 42.9%. Again, if you rounded too soon, you would have told me 40%, and that's not as accurate as 42.9%. So always round at the very end. Okay, so 2 examples there. Let's go ahead and change percents into decimals and vice versa. I did a little bit of decimal work here. It's all intertwined. So let's go from a percent to a decimal. This one works out pretty nicely. To do this, we just need to divide by 100. Basically, we're moving our decimal points two places left. So for example, if I gave you 450%, and again, we're not changing this into a fraction anymore, we're just changing it into a into a decimal. We're going to divide by 100. We're going to move our decimal point 2 places left, so we can say that this is in fact equal to 4.5. Done. No more percentage because I'm going straight to a decimal. Let's look at 2%. Here, if I move the decimal twice, I get 0.02. So again, 2% is very small. It's 2/100ths, or 0.02. What if you have 0.6%? Well, we can do the same thing. We will get 0.006 as our final answer here, and it's just a very, very small number, 6/1000ths. Let's go ahead and take our decimals and change them to percents. So I just did that a little bit in the example before with 3/7 because I changed that into a decimal first. But if you're already given a decimal, it's really easy to convert into a percent by multiplying by 100. So if I multiply this by 100, I can see that 4/1000ths is equal to 4%. If I gave you 9.5, I can move that decimal over. I get 950%. So again, 9.5, 950%. If I just gave you the number 3, and I wanted you to change that into a percent, you're going to move the decimal twice, and you will get 300%. Okay. With none of these, you didn't have to round with any of these like we did before, but if you did have to round, just follow those rounding rules. Let's take a look at some of the examples on your handout just to get you a little bit of practice. Looking at page 8, I would like you to go ahead and do numbers 2, 3, and 20. Hit unpause when you're ready to see the solution. So number 2 is, you had to use that new method, 53/600ths. Number 3 is 21/100ths, and number 20 is 71.43%. We will do more in class tomorrow, so I will see you then. Thanks.